Always my soulmate. By Watermelons Melons Felon. Chapter 3. Behold. It was a sudden thing. 12-year-old Katsuki Yuri wasn't expecting it to happen so soon, if at all. He'd heard stories from his parents on what happened for them. Minako-sensei had explained what had happened to her. He knew of other people's accounts, but he didn't even contemplate what it would be like for him. Yuko had rushed on over to ask him to come to the rink. She'd found a new favorite skater and wanted to show him, so that they could learn this new person's routines as well, and just have fun. And Yuri had gone along because he loved skating and a new challenge would be great. Until he got a good look at the skater in question. One 17-year-old Viktor Nikiforov, and Yuri's world, that had originally been colored in what he was informed were shades of gray, was alight. Yuri's soulmate was none other than Viktor Nikiforov, a budding champion in competitive figure skating and the most beautiful being that he'd ever seen. Yuri dedicated himself even harder to skating. If he ever wanted to meet his soulmate, he would have to be good enough to compete internationally, and that was what drove him to training harder than ever. He had something to look forward to in life. And when Yuri got home, he pulled a book from the shelf in his father's study and settled himself down to memorize all the colors that had eluded him for so long. And he learned that Victor's eyes, his beautiful eyes, were blue. Cerulean blue. Viktor Nikiforov was shocked. So much so that the first thing that came out of his mouth made even him wince internally. He'd sensed the staring, and like he'd predicted, someone was watching him, though their gaze wasn't full of the strange hunger of most fans, more of quiet contemplation and slight adoration. And Victor had turned to study the individual when his entire field of vision shifted. Gone were the grays. Instead, his sight was awash with other colors, and everything was so different. Victor couldn't help but stare at the young boy who had caused this new predicament. Said boy who didn't seem shocked in the least. Soulmates. They were soulmates, and if the boy wasn't shocked, then he must have known for a while. In Victor's sudden nervousness, he'd resorted to the charm he normally used for fans and interviews, and asked if the boy wanted a photo of him. To see those eyes of a color he did not yet know, go dead, hurt in a way, like someone had just stabbed him in the heart. The boy then turned his back on Victor and walked away. No one had ever done that to Victor before, and Victor found himself rooted in place, unsure of what to do. He didn't even know the boy's name. And he didn't like that fact. Katsuki Yuri. Victor sat up on his sofa when the link opened up to a YouTube video with his soulmate's face as the thumbnail. Eager and interested, he tapped the screen and was shocked when familiar music began to play. The young man, not a boy, he was only 4 years younger than Victor was apparently, took position easily and proceeded to make Victor's jaw drop. Victor's winning performance had taken nearly 2 months of intense study and training. It was detailed and intricate, beautiful like all other programs he'd skated before. But it did not sit well with him in terms of emotion. He hadn't done it justice despite how everyone loved it, and he'd won. He'd been dissatisfied with his own work, which was what prompted him to take some time off. There was a time for work and a time for reflection. Victor needed to consider. And there his soulmate was, skating as if he was a Victor himself. There was a significant height and weight difference between them, as well as appearance. Yet Katsuki Yuri managed to hit every spin and jump almost perfectly. He flowed into the movements with a finesse that Victor hadn't expected. He owned the dance itself, giving it that emotion that Victor had lacked, but so desperately desired. That performance had been done only a week ago. Katsuki Yuri, his soulmate, had managed a near-perfect rendition in... He glanced down at the post date, which showed the video was 13 hours old. 6 days and 9 hours. Something that took Victor months had been easy enough for his soulmate to mimic. That had to demonstrate just what Yuri was capable of. He found himself breathless by the end and mesmerized enough to watch again and again and again. And then he watched other performances of Yuri's, basking in the revelation that he was considered Japan's top figure skater, much like how Viktor was now considered Russia's top figure skater. Soulmates were supposed to be perfect for each other, and from everything he'd seen, Katsuki Yuri was perfection. All he had to do was woo the young man, and what better way to do so than to integrate himself into the other man's life? Starting today, I will be your new coach and will personally train you for this year's Grand Prix, where you will win. Yuri didn't remember much beyond Viktor Nikiforov, his soulmate, standing naked in his family's onsen. The last thing he remembered was the smile and wink before everything had gone completely black and he'd fainted. When he awoke, he found himself lying in bed with none other than Vik-chan laying beside him. Or rather, a dog very similar to Vik-chan, but it couldn't be Vik-chan because Vik-chan had passed on months ago. Hello, Yuri! Heart thumping! Yuri flinched and sat up in shock, looking around for the very familiar voice that was speaking English to him. Viktor Nikiforov was lying on his bed, back against the wall. Yuri was right beside him, and the dog, whom he was going to assume was actually Viktor's pooch, was on his other side. Yuri's face flamed instantly. He was barely covered, and Viktor was barely covered. It was all just too much. He gladly welcomed the darkness once again. Viktor was charmed. His soulmate was adorable, and despite barely knowing each other, well, he amended, looking around the room at the millions of posters of him, sort of knowing each other, he found the other man so interesting. You're his soulmate, right? Viktor looked up, seeing a young brunette with a cigarette between her fingers, standing in the doorway of Yuri's room. Yes, he nodded, making sure to pronounce his Japanese slowly. How did you know? I've known you were his soulmate since he was 12. He wasn't good at keeping it a secret, she said before taking a deep drag. The smoke she exhaled curled towards the ceiling before dissipating slowly. Since he was 12? Yuri had known that Viktor was his soulmate for 11 years. To go those years never being able to meet, and then to finally see Viktor in person, only to be treated like a common fan. Viktor felt guilty. He'd have to make it up to him, somehow. When Yuri awoke for the second time, he found his hands clasped within the larger hands of his soulmate. Viktor was bent over him from where he was kneeling on the bed, eyes full of some emotion that Yuri wasn't used to seeing. I'm sorry, Yuri. I can't imagine how it must have felt to not be acknowledged by your soulmate, but I promise that I'll make it up to you. Viktor's Japanese was heavily accented, but Yuri could understand, and he was oddly charmed by it. It was cute. You didn't know, the brunette murmured, eyes looking away from those startling blues. Viktor shook his head. That is no excuse for my assumption. I suppose the fame had got into my head, and for that I apologize. I did you a great disservice by not knowing that you were a fellow competitor. Yuri swallowed, throat tight. His palms were beginning to sweat, and when he tried retrieving them, Viktor wouldn't budge. Why do you want to coach me? Viktor's eyes softened. Because you have something I lack. You skated my routine to perfection and gave it what I couldn't. I've lost my drive for skating, but you have renewed my vigor. I want to be better, but not the best. I want to always keep everyone in suspense and not have them already accepting the fact that I'll win. Not being shocked when I perform well. It was getting old. I am old. You're not old, protested Yuri, feeling annoyed. The younger man sat up suddenly, forcing Viktor to lean back and out of his personal space, though he did not relinquish Yuri's hands. You're amazingly talented, and you've worked incredibly hard for almost 15 years to be where you are today. You can't give up now? The look Viktor sent him was full of shock and adoration, which made him blush. Yuri, you're the reason I haven't given up. I want whatever it is you have, and I want you to win the Grand Prix final. I want everything to do with you. Oh, we hardly know each other, the young man sputtered, unused to the intense emotion Viktor was showering him with. Then we get to know each other, Viktor couldn't help but nuzzle Yuri's cheek. It was flushed a deep shade of pink, Viktor learned from Yuri's book of colors. The young man was just so adorable. He wanted to kiss and hug him all the time, but the poor boy got so flustered he'd faint if anything went too far. That didn't mean that Victor couldn't tease him properly, though. There was always fun to be had, after all. You don't have to worry, Yuri, he said as he grasped Yuri's small hand in his own. I'll help you exercise. Then we'll begin training for real. Yuri's mother's choreo, but she saw them and muzzled off to go get the camera. Yuri fidgeted a little, but leaned into Victor's chest, allowing himself to be comforted. Progress in such a short span of time already. Good. Victor would be the best soulmate ever.